Wild places don't always warn you. Sometimes the only clues are a quiet campsite, a bent branch, or tracks that shouldn't exist. From a Yukon stream where gold prospectors were discovered under chilling circumstances, to a scientific drone team in northern Washington, watching their drone drop from the sky before their gear was torn apart. This video shares 6 unsettling encounters that reveal why the wild can be far more dangerous and mysterious than anyone could imagine. It was July 16th, 2025, and the Yukon wilderness simmered under a rare stretch of summer warmth, a thin haze of heat rising from the rocky outcrops and dense evergreens. Rangers on routine patrol along a rarely used mountain trail had begun the morning with the usual monotony, cataloging trail conditions and noting occasional wildlife signs, when a sudden, insistent barking shattered the stillness. A lone dog, a shaggy husky with a thick coat mottled in gray and white, emerged from the tree line, yipping frantically and refusing to advance despite the ranger's attempts to coax it. Its gaze remained fixed on a point deeper in the forest, muscles taut and ears pricked, and the sound it emitted carried an edge of panic that immediately set the rangers on alert. Following the animal cautiously, boots sinking slightly in the soft soil, they descended toward a shallow mountain stream that gleamed silver in the early sunlight, and what awaited there turned a routine patrol into something far darker. 3 figures lay partially submerged in the cold water, pale against the brown stones, their forms stiff, eerily still. They were gold prospectors who had been working the area in isolated claims, a fact that the rangers recognized immediately from scattered personal items nearby. Clothing hung oddly on their frames, some torn along seams that seemed almost deliberate, not the chaotic rips of a struggling human encounter with a bear. The rangers' stomachs tightened at the sight, the river water reflecting the pale faces with a distorted clarity, and a sinking sense of wrongness grew as they examined the scene. Among the scattered tools, panning pans, sluice box pieces, and a few battered backpacks, some had been stacked unnaturally, as if arranged for inspection, with smaller items perched atop larger ones in a way that suggested careful placement. There was no sign of a conventional struggle, no overturned tents, no discarded food remains, nothing but a quiet, calculated order amidst the carnage. Footprints marked the mud near the water's edge, enormous impressions that left no doubt that whatever had been here dwarfed a human in size and strength. Some prints were paired with long, dragging marks, gouges in the soft earth that told of enormous weight being moved, logs, packs, perhaps bodies, trailing toward the dense forest where shadows clung to the underbrush. Rangers measured one print nearly 16 inches long, with deep impressions of thick toes and curved nails, the kind of extremity that could crush a human skull or tear through reinforced boots. Branches along the stream were leaning against one another in triangular formations, the tips gouged and splintered as though shaped by a creature with immense power but careful precision. The dog shivered along the bank, ears pressed back, staring unwaveringly into the trees, trembling but unharmed, its growls low and warning, signaling an instinctive fear of something beyond comprehension. Authorities arrived shortly after the rangers' urgent call, local law enforcement and wildlife officers moving quickly to cordon the area. Initial assessments leaned toward a bear attack, a conclusion that seemed almost plausible at first glance, given the region's known grizzly population and recent reports of hungry males wandering closer to trails. But as forensic teams combed the scene, subtle inconsistencies made doubt impossible to ignore. Claw marks on trees were far too deep and numerous to have been inflicted by a single bear. The precision with which some items had been arranged, coupled with the dragging marks that implied coordinated lifting or carrying, suggested intelligence rather than mindless animal hunger. There were no bear tracks leading into the forest beyond the enormous prints, and no hair samples that matched known wildlife, though traces of thick, dark fur hinted at something far larger and more elusive. Rangers who had spent decades navigating the Yukon backcountry exchanged uneasy glances, recalling local legends whispered around miners' camps for generations. Enormous creatures, humanoid yet entirely wild, watching from deep forests, leaving footprints impossible to measure, and dragging off livestock or game with terrifying strength. For some, the scene at the stream echoed those stories, each detail aligning uncomfortably with tales that had been dismissed as folklore. Witness reports from nearby lodges mentioned fleeting glimpses of upright shapes in the early morning mist, movements too deliberate for any ordinary bear. The deliberate arrangement of items in triangular patterns seemed almost ritualistic, or perhaps a form of marking territory, evidence of intelligence, methodical and cold, as if the predator wanted observers to understand a message that human minds could scarcely interpret. The dog remained at the stream's edge, trembling yet resolute, refusing to approach the rangers despite being coaxed repeatedly. Its behavior was erratic but consistent, a nervous sentinel that had survived whatever had claimed the three prospectors. Rangers documented its reactions carefully, noting the fixed stare into the tree line and the occasional low growl when wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of decayed human and something musky, wild, and overpowering. Cameras and forensic kits collected soil and water samples, but no evidence conclusively matched any known animal. Even hairs recovered from torn clothing and the surrounding branches seemed anomalous, thick, coarse, and dark in a way that contradicted the region's documented wildlife. A forensic pathologist's preliminary assessment described blunt force trauma, deep lacerations, and signs of immense pressure applied across bodies, injuries inconsistent with bear attacks, hinting at a forceful, deliberate predator that could not be explained by ordinary wildlife. Investigators cataloged every footprint, scratch, and oddly positioned object. Despite this meticulous work, the scene retained an air of incomprehensible menace. When rangers and officers departed for temporary quarters, the dog lingered briefly, scanning the tree line, growling softly before finally turning and disappearing into the forest, as though guided by some inner knowledge of the predator that had left the carnage behind. Local news reported a bear attack, cautious phrasing shielding the truth, but whispers circulated among miners and longtime Yukon residents, each account speculating on the size and intelligence of the creature, drawing parallels to the legends that had persisted for decades. For those who saw the scene firsthand, nothing could reconcile the horror with simple predation. The footprints, claw marks, and deliberate arrangements implied a hunter unlike any known to roam the wilderness. Weeks later, search parties returned to the area to investigate further, but the massive prints had faded under rain and sun, and the strange triangular branch formations were gone, either decayed or dismantled by the forest's slow reclamation. Survivors who had glimpsed similar shapes deep in the forest recounted moments of frozen terror, sensing eyes watching, movements too rapid and calculated to be human or ordinary animal. On August 1st, 2024, the wilderness of northern British Columbia held its usual summer silence, the river stretching slow and reflective beneath the heavy canopy of spruce and cedar. A lone canoe drifted along its winding channel, guided by Emily Harper, a woman who had chosen the solitude of the backcountry as both challenge and sanctuary. Her journey had been deliberate, supplies carefully rationed, strokes steady and practiced, until she reached a small clearing where the bank spread out in a patch of exposed mud and stones. She drew the canoe ashore, placing her jacket and life vest neatly on the bank where they would remain dry, her gear a mark of order against the wild chaos of the forest. With the channel ahead narrowing into shadow, she pushed off again, curious to see what lay hidden where the water bent away into unfamiliar ground. The river was quiet, only the soft slap of paddle against water breaking the stillness, when motion caught her eye along the tree line. There, half-shadowed among trunks, a massive figure moved in a way that froze her in place, the paddle hovering above the surface. Covered in dark, matted hair and upright in posture, the shape blended and vanished among branches before she could gather the courage to look closer. The glimpse was fleeting, but the weight of its presence lingered in her chest, a sensation of being observed, hunted even, though she remained alone on the water. As she steadied herself, the surface beneath her canoe betrayed another sign, circular ripples radiating outward across the calm, concentric waves expanding as though something immense disturbed the current just beneath. The water returned quickly to glassy stillness, the pattern gone, yet her unease deepened with the knowledge that it had come from nowhere she could see. She turned the canoe back toward the clearing, her strokes quicker now, though every sound of paddle and splash seemed too loud against the oppressive silence of the forest. When she arrived at the bank where she had left her belongings, her unease hardened into dread. The jacket and vest she had folded with care lay sodden, soaked through as though submerged, water dripping steadily from the fabric despite the bright day and absence of rain. Tufts of coarse, dark hair clung to the material, thick strands unlike any she had seen, embedded in the folds of fabric as though something had pressed against them deliberately. Around the canoe, deep in the mud, were impressions that halted her breath, the prints of something human in form yet impossibly large, toes splayed, arches broad, heels pressed so deep that the water pooled in their depths. Broken branches leaned against each other in strange patterns around the clearing, not fallen by accident, but arranged with a deliberate hand. Long sticks had been pressed into the mud in angular formation that pointed toward the forest beyond, almost like arrows left to guide her gaze deeper into the shadows. Emily crouched low, tracing one print with her eyes, and felt the oppressive sensation that the arrangement was not only deliberate but communicative, as if some intelligence had sought to mark its territory, its intent, or its ownership of her presence. The forest offered no sound of ordinary life. Birds had vanished from the air. Squirrels remained silent. Even the river seemed to hush beneath the weight of the moment. She placed her vest back into the canoe, though it dripped and sagged heavily, and forced herself to sit, paddling away with strokes that betrayed her shaking arms. As she moved farther from the clearing, the sense of pursuit clung to her, as though eyes followed her from the dark timber, measuring her pace, her direction, and her fear. She kept glancing behind, expecting to see the figure break from the trees, but only the broken formations of branches remained visible until distance consumed them. When she reached the next ranger outpost along her route, her story spilled out in fragments. Wet gear left untouched, massive footprints that surrounded her canoe, a figure seen only once but burned into her vision, the strange ripples that hinted at something beneath the surface. Rangers documented her account and gathered the jacket and vest, still heavy with water and strands of hair clinging stubbornly despite attempts to shake them free. They took samples and dispatched a team back to the clearing, though by the time they arrived, rain had swept through, erasing much of the evidence. Only faint impressions in the mud and a few angled branches remained, unconvincing enough that the official report leaned toward a bear. Authorities noted that the region held a healthy grizzly population, and lone travelers were always vulnerable. Yet the details did not align. Bears did not soak fabric without tearing it, nor did they arrange branches in geometric patterns. The hair samples proved difficult, thick and coarse, resistant to classification, neither moose nor bear, not matching any known species in the databases they consulted. The official conclusion settled uncomfortably on probable bear disturbance, though though those who listened more closely to Emily's voice knew the weight behind her words spoke of something else entirely. In the small settlements along the northern rivers, whispers carried quickly, and Emily's story spread among locals who were no strangers to tales of massive, intelligent predators. Prospectors and trappers recalled stories of strange cries carried across lakes at night, heavy footsteps in the mud that vanished into the underbrush, and glimpses of figures watching from ridgelines with patient silence. They spoke in hushed tones of creatures that marked territory, not only with size and strength, but also with deliberate arrangement, signs left behind as if to remind intruders that they were never truly alone in the wilderness. For Emily, the experience never faded. She carried on her journey, completing her route and returning safely, but every ripple on calm water, every sudden silence in the trees, every brush of wind through branches brought her back to that clearing. She could still feel the weight of unseen eyes, could still see the sodden jacket and vest, could still smell the musky, wild odor clinging to the tufts of hair that refused to be explained. Authorities would close the case, stamping it with the simplicity of a bear. But for her, and for those who knew the old stories, the river had revealed something far greater, a predator that moved in silence, marking its presence with signs that few would ever truly understand. On the night of June 29, 2023, the northern Idaho wilderness seemed to hold its breath, the rugged backcountry trails cloaked in darkness, and the distant hum of nocturnal insects the only constant sound. A group of off-road enthusiasts had established a small, makeshift camp beside a muddy trail, their ATVs parked haphazardly among the evergreens, tarps stretched over steel frames, and a faint fire casting flickering shadows across rocks and underbrush. Among them was Logan Mercer, a seasoned rider in his late 20s, whose experience with steep trails and mechanical recovery far exceeded that of the others. He had been cautious all day, noting subtle signs of wildlife and marking precarious edges where ATVs might slip. Yet nothing had prepared him for what would unfold under the moonless sky. Around midnight, Logan stepped away from the fire and tents to relieve himself, the cold air brushing his face as he paused near the edge of the forest. In the dim light cast by his headlamp, he thought he saw movement among the trees. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of shadows or the swaying branches in the wind, but then a massive, dark shape emerged briefly between trunks, its outline upright and humanoid, yet impossibly broad. Logan froze, heart hammering, unable to make sense of what he saw. There was no growl, no roar, just deliberate, fluid motion, as if the figure were studying him, weighing his intentions. Frozen in place for several seconds, he finally tore his eyes away, forcing himself to retreat back toward camp, every snap of twig beneath his boots magnified in the quiet. When he reached the fire, the other riders noticed the strain in his posture, the pallor of his face, and the way his hands shook as he recounted a fleeting glimpse of something that defied explanation. Hours passed with the usual chatter subdued by unease, until the first hints of morning revealed a scene that made their fears concrete. One of the group, Ethan Caldwell, had failed to appear for a routine check on his ATV. As Logan and another rider moved toward the vehicles, they found him pinned under his own Jeep, the frame resting on his torso, but without any sign of the vehicle having tipped or rolled. The hood was intact, the tires properly aligned, and the ground beneath showed no indication of slippage. Ethan was conscious but grimacing with deep pain, bruises dark across his chest and back, claw-like welts etched along his arms and legs, injuries inconsistent with being trapped under a vehicle by accident alone. Panic surged through the group, and while one person stayed with Ethan, Logan scanned the surrounding area for further signs of disturbance. The mud around the trail yielded evidence both impossible and terrifying. Enormous footprints pressed deep into the soft earth, each one far larger than any human or bear, The toes splayed, the heel dug in as if the weight of a massive, upright predator had been concentrated on a single step. Between print, the soil bore long depressions, suggesting the dragging of limbs, gear, or something far heavier than Ethan himself. Broken branches had been arranged deliberately along the perimeter of the camp, leaning against one another in angular, almost geometric patterns that seemed to point toward the dense forest beyond. Every observation reinforced the notion that this was not a random attack of opportunity. It was methodical, calculated, and deliberate. Medical personnel later noted that the pattern of injuries on Ethan's body could not be explained by the vehicle alone. Deep contusions, claw-like gashes, and bruising indicated immense strength applied with intent. The logs and branches had not been broken naturally, and the trail of prints suggested a creature capable of lifting or manipulating objects far beyond the power of a bear. Logan and the others relayed the events to authorities, who arrived the following day, cameras and measurement tools in hand. Yet their official assessment leaned toward a grizzly or black bear, dismissing the intelligence implied by branch arrangements and the sheer scale of the predator's footprint. Despite reassurances, the group remained unconvinced, particularly Logan, whose experience in the wild made him acutely aware of how the evidence diverged from known animal behavior. As the team recounted the night, Logan recalled the figure he had glimpsed among the trees, the almost deliberate calm of its movements, and the oppressive sense of being watched. Each footprint confirmed the warning he had felt hours before. Each splintered branch and geometric formation reinforced a silent message that the predator had left behind, a reminder of its awareness, control, and power. Even weeks later, the memory of the attack clung to him, replaying in fragments the dark, looming shape. Ethan pinned beneath the jeep, the pattern of footprints vanishing into the forest like shadows fading at dawn. The forest around the site returned to its normal rhythms, bird song and wind through the pines masking the violence that had occurred. Rangers and investigators combed the area thoroughly, collecting measurements and samples. Yet the sheer scale and intelligence implied by the scene continued to challenge understanding. No hair or scat could be positively identified as a bear or any known species, and the unusual patterns suggested a creature capable of manipulating its environment with planning rather than instinct. For Logan and the surviving members of the off-road group, the forest had revealed a predator that moved with purpose and patience, hunting in silence while leaving cryptic marks that only those who dared venture into the backcountry would ever encounter. Even after returning to civilization, Logan could not shake the sensation of being observed, of footprints following him in memory, of branches leaning at impossible angles that had no meaning other than warning. Ethan's recovery was slow, his injuries a permanent reminder of the encounter, each bruise and claw-like mark a silent testament to power beyond comprehension. Authorities closed the official report with a cautious nod to bears, but Logan and those who had lived through the night knew the truth. A massive, calculating presence stalked the northern Idaho trails, intelligent and deliberate, leaving behind evidence that hinted at a predator unlike anything documented, a shadow in the forest that would forever haunt the memory of those who survived its visit. It was October 20th, 2024, when a hunting party camped deep in a remote Montana forest, the crisp autumn air carrying the faint scent of pine and fallen leaves, while the fading light of day bled through the towering evergreens. The group consisted of 3 seasoned hunters: Marcus Donovan, a veteran tracker in his early 40s known for his steady hand and meticulous habits; Eli Harper, younger but equally experienced, sharp-eyed and cautious; and Jonas Whitman, a tall, rugged man whose calm demeanor belied an acute sense of awareness in the backcountry. That evening, After a long day traversing ridgelines and dense undergrowth in pursuit of elk, Marcus and Eli had retired to their tent, bodies aching but minds alert, while Jonas tended to the fire and secured gear, the soft rustle of the forest providing the only background to their exhaustion. The night passed with the usual stillness, the kind of quiet that blankets deep wilderness camps where distant calls of nocturnal wildlife are muffled by trees and shadow. Marcus slept fitfully beside Eli, the occasional snap of a twig or rustle of leaves registering subconsciously as he shifted in his sleeping bag. Outside, the forest seemed undisturbed, yet something massive moved silently through the dark, threading between trunks with a precision and stealth that defied ordinary understanding. No sound reached Marcus as he lay in the tent, no hint of passage, no break in the natural rhythm of the woods, and yet by morning, the impossible had occurred. Eli awoke to a faint chill on his face, stretching and rubbing his eyes, expecting Marcus to stir beside him. Instead, he was met with absence. The sleeping bag was undisturbed, the tent flap secured from the inside, Marcus's rifle resting precisely against the canvas wall, and his backpack zipped and arranged neatly. It was as if Marcus had simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but the weight of disbelief. Jonas had not yet emerged from the fire, and when Eli called out, his voice caught in his throat as fear surged. Together, the two remaining hunters stepped out into the clearing, their boots sinking slightly in the damp soil, and the full scale of the scene became terrifyingly clear. Outside the tent, enormous footprints pressed deep into the mud, human-like yet impossibly large. Each impression stretched over a foot long and nearly a foot wide, toes splayed and heels sunk in, radiating weight far beyond any known animal or human. The tracks led into the dense forest with deliberate purpose, before abruptly ending where the trees thickened and shadow swallowed the ground. Nearby, claw marks gouged the bark of surrounding trees, deep and long, evidence of immense force applied with intelligence rather than instinct alone. Broken branches were carefully arranged in deliberate patterns, leaning against each other almost like markers, as though the predator wanted the remaining hunters to understand something, a silent warning or a cryptic signature left in the quiet of the forest. Eli and Jonas surveyed the area with mounting unease, the morning light revealing subtle details overlooked in darkness. The spacing of the footprints suggested bipedal movement with uncanny balance. The claw marks on the trees indicated strength capable of bending steel or tearing through reinforced canvas. Nothing in their decades of hunting experience accounted for a force capable of removing a grown man without displacing the tent, rifle, or gear, and yet the evidence was indisputable. Marcus Donovan had been taken, silently, deliberately, and with planning beyond the comprehension of even the most seasoned hunters. Authorities arrived days later, called in after Jonas and Eli returned to the nearest town to report the incident, their faces pale and voices taut with disbelief. Initial assessments leaned toward a bear, a possibility the hunters dismissed outright. Bears could not remove a man from a tent without tipping it, nor arrange branches in precise formations or leave footprints of such scale. The report cataloged the claw marks, footprints, and arrangements, yet concluded cautiously that no definite explanation could be confirmed, the official narrative favoring an anomalous but natural predation. The men left frustrated, knowing the forest held a secret, something massive, calculating, and intelligent that had taken their friend and left only its cryptic signature behind. For Eli and Jonas, the forest would never feel the same. Every gust of wind through the pines, every shadow stretching across a clearing, carried the memory of Marcus's disappearance. Backcountry trails they had walked for years now seemed alien, alive with presence and intent beyond comprehension. Local hunters whispered of similar disappearances over decades, of footprints too large for humans or known wildlife, of deliberate patterns in branches, claw marks on trees, and animals or travelers simply vanishing without a trace. The stories reinforced the reality Eli and Jonas had witnessed firsthand, a predator moving silently, leaving terror and impossible evidence behind. Even weeks later, Eli would recall the faint outline he glimpsed through the trees just before dawn, a shape upright and massive, watching from a distance as Marcus disappeared. Jonas's recollections were filled with the quiet terror of returning to the clearing alone, tracing footprints that led into darkness and ended without explanation. Marcus Donovan's disappearance became a grim reminder of the wilderness's hidden forces, a testament to intelligence and strength beyond any known creature. Authorities would close the case, citing an unknown predator or extreme misfortune, but for those who survived, the Montana forest had spoken clearly. It was home to something massive, predatory, and calculating, capable of removing a human without leaving a trace, its presence a permanent scar on the memory of those who remained. It was December 29th, 2021, when a group of skiers traversed a remote section of the European Alps, the icy wind cutting through layers of synthetic clothing and snow crunching beneath boots and skis. The party consisted of 4 experienced winter athletes: Luca Moretti, a guide familiar with high-altitude trails; Clara Voss, a seasoned ski mountaineer known for her sharp instincts; Jonas Engel, a sturdy, observant companion who tracked subtle changes in snow and weather; and Sophie Reinhardt, younger but highly skilled, whose attention to detail often caught anomalies in the terrain. Their excursion had been intended as a day-long adventure, exploring lesser-known passes and untouched powder fields, but the remote isolation of the slopes soon became apparent as twilight settled across the jagged peaks. As the group rounded a bend between 2 ridges, Luca's eyes caught something unusual, partially obscured by a draping pine. There, sitting motionless in deep snow, was a man soaked and pale, shivering violently from hypothermia. His clothing clung to him in damp patches, though no water source was visible nearby, and his skis lay neatly beside him, while his ski poles were nowhere to be found. Sophie knelt beside the stranger, brushing snow from his jacket, while Clara and Jonas scanned the surrounding forest for threats or signs of what had happened. The man could barely speak, his lips cracked and teeth chattering, but he managed to utter a single statement. He had seen a massive, shadowy figure moving among the trees before losing his bearings. The skiers' concern deepened as they examined the snow around him. The ground was disturbed in swirling, unnatural patterns, deep depressions that twisted across the slope like something enormous had passed deliberately, pressing and dragging across powder in a way that no human or ordinary animal could create. The branches of nearby trees had been broken and leaned against one another in crude triangular formations, and several low-hanging rocks bore deep gouges and chips as if struck or clawed by immense strength. Tufts of coarse, dark fur clung stubbornly to the stranger's jacket, embedded in seams and pockets where it should not have been. The group shared uneasy glances, their previous adventures through the Alps providing no precedent for the scale or intelligence implied by these signs. Luca helped the man to his feet, supporting him as they moved carefully back toward a safer trail. He introduced himself through fragmented words as Matthias Bauer, a local skier who had ventured off-trail alone in search of powder and become disoriented. His recollections were fragmented and trembling, but every word reinforced the surreal nature of what had occurred. He spoke of a towering figure, upright and massive, that had moved with careful stealth, observing from the tree line. The memory alone seemed to drain his strength further, his hands shaking as they brushed against snow that bore the remnants of the strange passage. Jonas and Clara traced the disrupted snow, noting the depth of impressions and the swirling patterns that contradicted any known avalanche, animal, or human track. Each swirl suggested deliberate movement, a force interacting with the environment rather than simply moving through it. Broken branches and gouged rocks seemed almost ritualistic, or at the very least markers, pointing back toward the forest from which the figure had emerged. By the time the group reached a lower trail where snowmobiles could be secured, Matthias's condition remained fragile. Hypothermia had sapped his strength and awareness, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably as he repeated fragments of what he had seen. Local rescue teams arrived soon after, taking him to a nearby medical station for treatment, while the skiing party described the scene they had encountered. Authorities cataloged the broken branches, gouged rocks, and unusual tracks, but were confounded by the tufts of fur and the spiraling snow patterns, which defied classification and any ordinary explanation. Their report ultimately leaned on environmental hazards and human error as likely causes, though no physical evidence fully supported such a theory. For Luca, Clara, Jonas, and Sophie, the encounter left a lasting impression. The mountains seemed altered, alive with awareness, the snowy expanse now carrying a weight of possibility that had not existed before. Even after leaving the high Alps behind, each skier recalled Matthias's pale, shivering face, the strange arrangements in the snow, and the hair clinging to his jacket. The encounter was more than a simple disorientation in winter wilderness. It was a confrontation with something massive, cunning, and intelligent, moving through the high Alps with a precision and patience that no human or known animal could match. In the weeks that followed, whispers circulated among alpine guides and local skiers, tales of a shadowy, bipedal figure stalking backcountry slopes in winter, leaving behind signs of deliberate, intelligent movement. Luca often replayed the encounter in his mind, noting the swirling patterns of snow that seemed to trace a path of observation, the triangular branch markers that pointed from the trees toward the clearing, and the low-hanging rocks, gouged as though to demonstrate strength. Each detail suggested presence and awareness, a silent predator capable of observing, planning, and leaving evidence that challenged understanding. Matthias recovered physically, though the memory of what he had witnessed haunted him. He described in tremulous detail the sensation of being watched, the weight of unseen eyes, the soundless movement through the trees, and the overwhelming size of the figure. Authorities would close the incident with no conclusive explanation, citing environmental hazards and extreme misadventure in treacherous alpine terrain. Yet for those who had witnessed the scene firsthand, the truth was undeniable. A massive, calculating presence had passed through, intelligent and patient, leaving both tangible and invisible marks on the landscape and on the minds of those who had survived to tell the tale. On July 13, 2024, the dense forests of northern Washington seemed serene from above, the emerald canopy stretching endlessly between ridges and valleys. A scientific drone team was tasked with surveying the area, mapping flora and fauna with the precision of technology and trained eyes. The team consisted of Dr. Rachel Kim, a lead ecologist specializing in wildlife behavior, Ethan Price, an experienced drone operator, Laura Bennett, a field technician responsible for data collection, and Victor Santos, an engineer who maintained the sensitive equipment. They had set up at a small clearing, carefully coordinating flight paths, ensuring batteries were fully charged, and confirming signal strength through the thick canopy. The drone lifted into the warm morning air, hovering smoothly above the treetops, its sensors recording every leaf and branch. Rachel studied the live feed, noting tree density and vegetation patterns, while Ethan adjusted altitude and trajectory with practiced hands. Laura logged coordinates, and Victor monitored the drone's mechanical performance. The forest below seemed undisturbed, the only sounds faint bird calls and the soft rustle of wind through needles. Suddenly, mid-flight, the drone wobbled violently, jerking erratically as its motors spun uncontrollably. Victor shouted warnings, but before anyone could intervene, it crashed into the trees with a deafening crack, metal twisting around branches and the camera lens shattering instantly. The team sprinted toward the crash site, concern mixing with frustration as they moved through uneven terrain, tangled roots snagging boots and clothing. As they neared the downed drone, Laura froze, a low, guttural growl cutting through the air, vibrating in the trees around them. Branches snapped violently at the edge of their vision, but the movement was too fast, too massive to track clearly. Ethan raised his hand, eyes wide, and swore he glimpsed a figure upright and covered in dark hair, moving with a speed that defied human or bear capabilities. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a sense of immense presence lingering in the air. The drone lay twisted, its propellers shredded, camera obliterated, and circuitry exposed to the elements. Surrounding it, enormous footprints pressed deep into the soft earth, circular and elongated, clearly human-like in form, but impossibly large. The heels sunk into mud, toes splayed unnaturally wide. Each print radiated outward, circling the wreckage, as if the creature had inspected or guarded its handiwork. Torn wires, bent frames, and scattered pieces of equipment littered the site, suggesting deliberate interference rather than random destruction. Broken branches leaned against one another at odd angles, forming unnatural patterns that pointed toward the dense forest, almost like arrows guiding attention away from the clearing. Rachel crouched to examine the prints, feeling the weight of their depth and the spacing between them, calculating the stride of a creature far exceeding the dimensions of a grizzly or moose. Victor attempted to repair the drone while glancing nervously at the tree line, the rustle of leaves and occasional snapping of twigs keeping him alert to unseen movement. Laura documented the scene meticulously. Each observation reinforced the terrifying likelihood that this was no ordinary animal. Intelligence had been demonstrated, the drone had been targeted, the branches arranged deliberately, and the prints indicated a creature capable of both observation and manipulation. Despite attempts to rationalize the incident, fear quickly set in. The team's training and experience with wildlife provided no explanation for a predator moving with such stealth and speed, capable of interacting with objects purposefully and leaving no visual trace beyond fleeting glimpses. Rachel instructed the others to retreat slowly, maintaining visibility of one another while leaving markers to retrace their path. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shadow cast by the sun filtered through trees, reinforced the sense that eyes watched them, assessing their movements, gauging their reactions. By the time they reached safer terrain, the team was shaken, each member pale and tense. Ethan could still see the blurred image of the towering figure, the dark outline disappearing into shadows too dense to penetrate. Laura and Victor debated whether to attempt another survey, but Rachel's authority and instinct prevailed. The forest was no longer safe for drones or humans, not when a predator capable of deliberate sabotage and observation roamed unseen. Authorities were contacted, but their conclusions leaned toward bear activity. The scale of footprints, the intelligence implied by the arrangement of branches and destruction of equipment, was largely dismissed as improbable, though Rachel knew the truth lay beyond conventional explanation. For days afterward, the forest remained silent, but the memory of the encounter lingered. Each member of the team could recall the unnatural speed, the massive proportions of the figure, and the way it had manipulated the environment around the drone. Rachel found herself reviewing every frame of corrupted footage, attempting to reconstruct the angle of approach, the spacing of prints, and the pattern of branch arrangements. Victor continuously replayed the drone's last flight path, noting how it had stalled precisely at the location where the prints circled the wreckage, as though the creature had anticipated its trajectory. Local hikers and rangers were warned by the team, the word spreading quickly that northern Washington had become dangerous for aerial surveys and solo excursions. The wilderness, so often regarded as quiet and predictable, now bore signs of a predator far larger and more cunning than any known species, capable of observing, planning, and leaving traces of deliberate intelligence in its wake. Ethan, Laura, and Victor struggled to reconcile their experience with what authorities accepted as plausible. Rachel, however, carried the weight of certainty. The forest had revealed its secret, and the creature that stalked it was patient, calculating, and capable of interacting with human technology in ways that defied natural explanation. Even weeks later, the images of shredded equipment, enormous footprints, and strange branch formations haunted their thoughts. Each recalled the sensation of being silently watched, the guttural growls that vibrated through trees, and the fleeting glimpse of a massive, hairy figure moving with preternatural speed. Authorities closed the case with a tentative nod to bears, yet for the team that had witnessed the event firsthand, the forest had spoken clearly. Intelligence, size, and deliberate action had combined in a predator that would remain invisible yet profoundly present, an unseen force that would shape their perception of wilderness forever.